Atheists, huh? They say some random things, right? Well, I could listen to many atheists for hours and feel like I learn a lot, like better questions to ask and new ways to absorb information. But what if those arguments are wrong? What if there was a theist who could debunk some of the top atheist arguments? What if? Hello, I'm the Skeptic. I watch videos on YouTube that make extraordinary claims, whether that's flat earth or strange conspiracies, but mostly the claim that a god is real, and then explain why I can't accept their position. Before we get into today's video, please do subscribe, hit that bell notification to be alerted for my next video, and drop a like. That would be awesome. In this God Squad video, Ben Shapiro interviews William Lane Craig, the Christian theologian and apologist. Will can debunk some of the top atheist arguments, and I thought it would be good to learn something new, since those top atheists inspire my line of thinking. I want to know why they're wrong.
Let's talk about a couple of those philosophy arguments from 101 that are constantly trotted out. I've had similar experiences. The most common one that I've heard, of course, is the problem of evil, the suggestion that how can God be good if so much evil takes place in the world? Yeah. The more sophisticated version of the argument to me is not the problem of human evil, which seems pretty easily disposable, but the problem of natural evil things happening to children, a child with cancer. How does a good God rule over a world in which children die of natural causes, in which kids are born with Tay-Sachs, in which horrible things happen to good people?
Yes. In dealing with this problem, I think it's really important that we distinguish between what I call the intellectual problem of evil and the emotional problem of evil.
Oh, deep. I'm looking forward to this one.
There is no doubt that emotionally, the evil and suffering in the world make it very difficult to believe in God. It's a tremendous emotional obstacle.
I don't think passing off bad things that happen as just emotional is a good way to start.
But intellectually, considered dispassionately as a philosophical problem, it's extraordinarily difficult to show that there's either any inconsistency or improbability between the existence of an all-loving, all-powerful God and the evil and suffering in the world.
Wouldn't it be good to just answer the original question? It sounds as if you're saying that it could be impossible that there is a compassionate God because there is evil in the world.
The atheist would have to show that it is either impossible or improbable that God has morally sufficient reasons for permitting the natural and moral evil in the world.
Is this first debunking just a shift in the burden of proof? If someone doesn't believe that an entity is real, why should they then need to prove what its moral justifications might hypothetically be?
And how could he possibly show that? We're simply not in a position to make those kind of probability judgments with any confidence. And so I think that the problem of evil, as difficult as it may be emotionally, intellectually, it lays a burden of proof on the shoulders of the atheist, which is so heavy that it has proved to be unsustainable.
Did that even answer the question? No, not even close. Here, William, you dropped your burden of proof.
These days, the other argument that is brought up an enormous amount is the supposed backwardness of the Bible itself and biblical morality.
So we're just ignoring the whole, if there's a God, why is there evil question? What even is this? Did I miss something?
This happens largely with regard to, for example, homosexual marriage. It's been brought up with regard to abortion, which I think is more, again, easily disposable, because I think there's a solid secular argument in favor of the protection of human life. But homosexual marriage is the one that most often comes up. You also hear arguments that the Bible permits slavery. So if the Bible is so wonderful, then why are there all these weird sections of the Bible where it talks about wiping peoples from the earth, where it talks about enslaving other human beings? Some things that we would certainly consider moral evils today are contemplated by the Bible and not banned by the Bible. So why is that?
Well, let me address briefly first this question of slavery. When we hear the word slavery, Ben, we think of slavery as it existed in the American South. And as you know, that is nothing like the system that existed in ancient Israel.
Oh, justifying slavery. This should be good.
In ancient Israel, there was no social safety net sponsored by the state. There was no poverty program. So if a man got himself into a situation where he couldn't pay his debts, he could keep his family together and retain his self-respect by selling himself as an indentured servant.
Who could then be treated in any way the new owner saw fit, including beatings as long as the new slave wasn't killed, and owning any offspring that slave had in the time that the slave was owned. It doesn't matter how it's spun, it's just wrong.
Until he could work off his debts, and then he would have to be set free. After 7 years, he had to be set free in any case.
No. Don't try and spin it to sound good. Foreign slaves were enslaved for life. Then there's the case of female slavery, wherein females were given the same rights as women. Some treated as though they were married, which I can only assume meant pleasing the owner as a wife should, because, consent wasn't exactly a thing a few hundred years ago, let alone when the Bibles were written. And then there was this case of unmarried female slaves being sold as wives. Is being forced as a wife better than being forced into labour? You can try to make slavery sound appealing, but it's not. It's just simply not.
So this was really a form of indentured servanthood. It wasn't slavery as we think of that term.
Please, really, stop trying to justify it. It's just embarrassing.
This was actually an anti-poverty program. And in some respects, I think it's better than what we have in modern Western culture, which destroys families.
Or maybe it's not a perfect system, but still, the answer isn't sell yourself to become a slave.
Whereas in ancient Israel, a man retained his self-respect, he worked for an income, he paid his debts, he kept his family together, and that to call that slavery is just a gross misrepresentation.
When is it okay to own another person? Never. The answer is never. Even if they're struggling to find work, it's still never. The answer will always be, and should always have been, never.
The first thing you mentioned, I've forgotten.
Homosexual marriage.
Yeah,
Same-sex
okay.
marriage.
Was that it for debunking atheist slavery arguments? Seriously? Okay then. Tell us why homosexual marriage is wrong.
With respect to some of these other moral questions, I think we need to remember the first premise of the moral argument. If there is no God, then there are no objective moral values.
I hope you didn't sidestep near to a cliff. A sidestep that big would have you falling off the edge.
Everything is socioculturally relative. So who's to say that the moral values of a society that discriminates against people and oppresses people is worse than one which is liberal and tolerant? We just sort of assume that the liberal values are the ones that would be objective, when in fact they're just as relativistic as any of the other ones on atheism.
But atheism doesn't offer a moralistic position. Atheism simply rejects a claim that there are gods. You can say that atheists become immoral because they don't believe the thing that creates the morality, but morality should be what is accepted for the well-being of our species as a whole, not what some people think a deity says is moral, which, given the book that most of these morals are cultivated from, has an abundance of things that aren't actually beneficial to the well-being of the human race. We can't really accept it.
So if we need God to be the anchor point for objective moral values and duties, we cannot escape the question, when thinking of moral right and wrong, well, what does God think of this?
Who cares? It would just be a hypothetical until it's demonstrated that there even is a God to listen to. You can't govern human well-being on a hypothetical. But sure, carry on about gay marriage.
And if God proscribes something, it seems to me that's entirely within his right.
I thought it was man that wrote the Bibles, trying to guess what a God was saying, so surely it's more honest for a theist to say at this point, it's entirely within the right of what man thinks a God is saying. Still, it's not, but you know what I mean.
If God were to say, thou shalt not eat beans, or thou shalt not eat pork,
or thou shalt not eat shellfish,
that would be our moral duty, and we should obey it. That is his prerogative as the moral lawgiver and the supreme good.
Is it though? Is it? You're not offering any reason to accept that there is a God, let alone to accept what man thinks it's saying.
And so if God says, my plan for human sexuality is heterosexual marriage, that's his prerogative.
But is it correct?
And there is no basis for calling that, I think, into question.
There absolutely is. If there was an all-loving God, why would it give people the choice to love who they wanted, but then tell them that some choices are wrong? It's ludicrous.
I want to go back to slavery for just a second. So it is true that Hebrew enslavement, that Jewish enslavement of others is really more indentured servitude. I mean, there's a whole section in, I believe it's Numbers or Leviticus, think it's Leviticus maybe, where it speaks to specifically about the slave who doesn't want to leave, and you're supposed to pierce his ear on the doorpost as a punishment for him not wanting to leave and all of this. But by the same token, enslavement of people who are not inside the Israelite, inside the Jewish kind of tradition, that's not proscribed. So the idea of war captives is obviously taken into account and not banned. So certain things are banned in the Bible, certain things are not banned. Now, the way that biblical believers have practiced over time is that very early in the church's history, they're already starting to eliminate slavery, although not for people who are captured. And then over time, the West is the first place to eliminate slavery altogether, specifically citing the sections of the Bible that talk about human freedom and the innate value of every human being. So is that an evolution of morality, or is that a realization of a fundamental principle that was originally given to people who couldn't necessarily understand the full extent of the principle?
Oh, I think it's the latter, and I love the way you put it. I think that's nicely put. Jesus said something very much like this with respect to Old Testament regulations on divorce. They asked him whether or not it was lawful to divorce a woman for any reason, and Jesus said, Moses allowed you to write a certificate of divorce, but it was not so from the beginning. And he cites then the creation story of Genesis of Adam and Eve.
I thought we were talking about slavery, not divorce. Answer the bloody question. William said that Jesus said that Moses said. How many times is the buck going to be passed? I feel myself getting more and more irritated at the lack of any real justification for anything.
And said, what God has put together, and let not man put asunder.
Oh, of course. Someone else did it.
So what Jesus was saying there was that the law of Moses was a temporary prescription accommodating the hardness of heart of the people at the time, but it didn't represent the perfect will of God.
So something in the Bible isn't perfect? It sounds as if that's what's being said. So if something isn't perfect, how can we demonstrate which parts of the Bible are perfect and which aren't? I would guess that because there's a chance that some of it could be imperfect, that then actually most or all of it could be imperfect, which would then question why any of it should be listened to.
For human marriage, which was grounded in the creation story.
So how exactly do we determine when we have moved beyond the biblical text in terms of the evolution of that morality? When are we fulfilling a broader goal that was kind of held back by temporary constraints? And when are we moving utterly beyond it? And again, here I'm thinking of same-sex marriage. So when it comes to same-sex marriage, the argument is now being made by people in liberal churches, including Pete Buttigieg, who's running for president, that basically Jesus was seeking equal respect for everyone. He cared about the least of these, and the prescriptions on homosexuality were really more, and homosexual activity were not eternal precepts, but were really attempting to crack down on the promiscuity of the time, or they were temporary expedients.
In other words, it was wrong to be gay then, but it's not now. Where does it say that in any holy book, that these rules are time sensitive? You can't be gay on Monday to Wednesday, but Thursday through Sunday, fill your boots. It's just dumb.
Yeah, I think that's clearly false. When you look at these regulations, both in the Old Testament and then they're repeated in the New Testament in the strongest terms in Romans chapter 1, there's no doubt that Paul is thinking of this as a moral law that has abiding significance.
I think this is what they meant, but I can't demonstrate it. Yeah, sure.
And it's grounded again, I think, in the creation story, that God has created human sexuality, He's created man and woman in such a way that the fulfillment of that relationship will take place within the safety and security of a heterosexual marriage.
And those that have homosexual thoughts should deny who they are and please an entity that hasn't been demonstrated to be there, instead of living the life that they want to, following the moralistic way of the life determined by those that have human well-being at the core. Okay.
And that outside of that, sexual activity is not to be indulged in. And this is a law that God has given us for our good. So I do not think that this is capable of simply being relativized to time and culture.
That God, if it was real, sounds like a dick. As arguments go, I don't feel like anything was debunked here, just a few major sidesteps and nothing was really confirmed. However, maybe you thought William did debunk some atheistic arguments. Let me know in the section below, but I'm going to skeptic some top atheist arguments as still valid and waiting to be completely eradicated. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.